Hello and welcome to another React Rally speaker interview. I am Jameson Dance and I'm here with Brian Lonsdorf.
Hey.
Brian, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So I am a JavaScript programmer at work at Salesforce, and I'm a PureScript and / Haskell hacker on weekends and nights. And I get really passionate about some of the great ideas I see in that world, and I try to bring them into my JavaScript world every day. And trying not to do that in a pretentious way, and I don't really have like a PhD, or I don't read white paper. Like I struggle through white papers, just all the stuff that I think everybody else I know around me kind of goes through. So I hope to maybe be that kind of person for people. I guess that's who I identify with.
Yeah. I want to come back to that because that's a really interesting idea. But first, do you want to talk about how you got into programming, kind of what your background and history is?
Sure. Well, I was being a rocker in a band, trying to
Really,
yeah, I was all like listening to my '90s rock and trying to do that, and then that kind of fell apart. We ended up moving to like Laguna Niguel down in Orange County, and we had a manager and stuff, and by the time the record industry was just so bad at that point that like we're all just learning programming as a
really?
backup. Yeah, and it worked out great.
When was this?
It's like 2005, 6, like around Rails was like new. People were like, check out this blog post DHH did. It builds a blog.
So people were describing him as a rock star programmer, and like, how did you feel about that as an actual rock star?
Right, as a failed rock star. It was cool.
He could never cut it in my world.
It was really difficult to learn. It was like this stuff is incredibly hard, and we always thought of it back then as like impossible because you didn't really hear much about stories of like friends like teaching themselves to program in 2005 or 6. It was more like we were just doing it because it looked like an awesome lifestyle or whatever. But
like you looked at the rock musician lifestyle and were like, I wish I could sit behind a desk more.
Exactly, yeah.
And get pale and hunched.
DHH, I mean, in a way, he was kind of like, he seemed like a normal. He didn't seem like someone that was like, oh, I grew up in, a dungeon somewhere and all I've done is read books. So, I guess he was inspirational in that way. And
that's cool.
Yeah, Rails is accessible. It was so easy in hindsight, but at the time, it's very difficult to capture every little piece of the whole programming puzzle and, see it from an aerial view. Like it takes a long, long time to learn that stuff. So Rails assists. I mean, that's the way I felt with it. It was like, oh, I can change this number to a float, but that's all I can do. Like it was like learning how to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star on your like guitar. You're like, I want to learn how to jam.
Yeah.
So,
like that feeling of frustration that you could see what other people can do and just not imagine a world where you could do that.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy. We actually were just talking about that a little while ago on the last JS Air about like these barriers to like entry or things that keep you interested in programming, like little wins or whatever. And yeah, I really think something like Rails can help, keep you afloat, even though you might not know enough yet. So it's like a power chord, when you're learning guitar, you're like, oh yeah, I can play songs with this thing. I can't shred, but I can do stuff that's interesting that I feel good about.
And you could play most songs.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Sure. I'm a failed guitarist, so I know a little bit.
Right on.
So that's interesting that you talked about that emphasis on just kind of learning and teaching yourself, because I feel like a lot of what you do is focused around education. I first heard of you from Professor Frisbee's Mostly Adequate Guide to Functional Programming, which is an interesting take on teaching. Do you feel like your desire to teach kind of came from your experiences learning yourself?
Oh, that's interesting. No, I think it was more out of frustration that I wanted to program the way I wanted to program, and I wish more people knew the style I was into. So I was like, I need to write something about this, or I need to tell people about this, because if more people are doing this, then I will, be happier in my day job. I won't have to always explain why I want it to be composable. And it's amazing to see just this like not that I'm taking any credit for this whatsoever, but I think a lot of people around the same time got into functional programming, and then they all kind of started getting into front end because that was happening. And now it's like this functional front end revolution. It's really cool to see just everybody's new libraries come out with like, now you can compose these things, or now you can combine these things.
Sure. So I guess I didn't ask you to define what this is for people who haven't heard of it. So what is Professor Frisbee's Mostly Adequate? Is there an acronym for this?
Actually,
Mostly Adequate Guide to Functional Programming.
Right. I usually call it the Mostly Adequate Guide. Yeah, but
okay.
But it's still long. It's still a mouthful. It's a little guidebook on. It tries to be as terse and short as possible on just heavy functional concepts that you would encounter if you were to go program in Scala or F# or Haskell or PureScript or Elm, or you name it, except for Clojure, like weird Lispy languages it doesn't really talk about. Weird Lispy language, but so there's this general kind of like style in most functional languages, and it tries to teach you through that. So it talks about currying and composition and functors and monads and things like that as fast as it can, and tries to get out of your way from the perspective of a grumpy old badger, British badger, which morphed into like this hedgehog character because I couldn't find a badger character for my videos.
Sure. Let's see. How do I say this? So earlier you mentioned that you like trying to make functional programming a little more accessible. And I've definitely felt trying to learn it, that kind of ivory tower, like steely gaze of judgment upon me for not having a strong category theory background. Did you have kind of like a negative experience? Like what made you want to make these ideas more accessible? Because obviously you got excited about them somehow, but then you felt like there was maybe something lacking in the way that they were being taught or communicated.
Yeah, I think it was, for me, it was a huge lack of example code, right? Like they're like, here's this thing, it's called a comonad, and it's the dual of a monad, and this is how it's defined, and this is how it's implemented. If you go look it up today, it's like impossible to find an example of this thing. I think the best one I found is Hardy Jones's. He did this really cool little like tree structure that, with the idea of a comonad is you can know the context of the entire data structure from any given position. So if you're in a tree, like you're on this leaf, but you can still access everything else in the data structure from that leaf. Which is pretty neat. But like, that's all they do is they tell you the definition and they're like, okay, that's it. Good luck. And you're like, well, how do I use this? Show me some context. Yeah. And so like years of battling that, I was finally like, you know what? I want to try to help people that felt the way I felt and show them some real life examples and talk in terms that they might understand. Because I was feeling the same pain. But I also, I've always kind of let the guiding light in my path for learning and stuff be find the people who are smarter than you, do what they're doing. So maybe that's a faulty path, but I can like now I'm just like basically seeing who all the smartest people I know are, what are they doing? And I'll try to get on with that. So
that's cool. So I want to ask a little bit about the kind of the style of your stuff. Are you familiar with Y, like the Ruby guy, Y the Lucky Stiff?
He's like a hero of mine for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say it reminds me a lot of that. It's kind of that feeling of like whimsy and not taking itself very serious, and also a little bit of maybe weird for the sake of weird thrown in there.
Right. Totally. I've always liked, certain artistic things, and I'm always trying to like make that, but I'm not a really great artist, and I'm not really great at tech either, but hopefully if I mash them together, I'll make something interesting enough.
Like if you find the small enough niche, you will be the world's best person at that niche.
That's exactly right. I'm the world's best functional programming stop motion video on YouTube creator.
Yeah, those are amazing. I love the one about like what is functional programming. I can't remember the title of it, but I've shown that to a bunch of people.
Right. Yeah. No, that was a fun thing to do because I was like, I work with this German guy and I work with a French guy, and I'm like I'm like learning their languages or their accents a little bit, but like
Hmm.
speeding it up really helps to play all the different characters' voices.
Yeah.
And I have my, I have like maybe I realize now that for accessibility reasons, maybe that wasn't the best approach. So trying to get maybe some voice actors or trying to do a better job instead of just
Oh, wow.
crank it up.
So this is going to be like a pretty serious deal then. You're going to, if you're going to get
No,
voice
well,
actors.
well, I was just going to do one more thing for Egghead, and it's taking forever. But I want to like just release like a real series that talks about stuff from beginning to end in that format because I really enjoyed it. Just where it's tolerable, so people aren't like just leaving terrible YouTube comments the whole time.
I mean, if you post it on YouTube, though, you're kind of just, no matter what it is, you're inviting terrible YouTube comments. Like
It's true. They are the bottom of the barrel, huh?
the Sistine Chapel posted to YouTube would get a lot of, I don't know, just like racist jokes put on it or something.
That's true.
I guess I skipped some steps here and didn't introduce the thing that we're talking about, which is, so you do the mostly adequate guide. Then you also do this series of, you kind of mentioned it already, the stop motion and animation type instructional videos about functional programming, which are unlike any other technical content out there that I've seen. I think they're really awesome.
Oh, I'm glad.
So
Thanks.
those are rad.
Yeah, those are definitely. They were just like a weekend project, and they didn't really take too much thought. I was like, I'm gonna just make this little app real quick, and they kind of drag on at parts, so speeding it up really helped.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm working on a little bit of more of a polished version. I actually bought a camera. I did that all on my iPhone.
Okay.
So like I actually bought a little camera, and so I'm working on that. But yeah, it's cool. It's
When you say a more polished version, I just imagine like live action on like a green screen or something.
like paper mache, badger hat or something.
Yeah.
Awesome. I did actually consider like doing cutscenes. Like we bought this chalkboard when I was at Lubriker, and it was like we had math night, and I never could keep up. So it was like, so it was just Joe and Adam. Anyway, so we had this like chalkboard, and I wanted to put on like a furry glove and like draw on the chalkboard and like cut into like those scenes. But then I realized how like weird and scary that would be if you're looking at this animated happy world and it's just like real life. Anyway, so backed out of that.
I don't know. There's enough to-do lists. I think programming could use a little bit more weird and scary stuff.
Right. I agree. I think it's fun to keep people's interest with something that's a little bit, where like you read a book from, do you remember the Da Vinci Code? Everybody's all obsessed with that book. And it had like all these conspiracy theories intertwined with this fiction. And like those intersections I think are really interesting. They keep people like, interested in learning content as well as, the other things going on.
Sure.
So I'm not that I'm a huge fan of the Da Vinci Code. It's a great example.
I think I've got the title for this interview.
The Da Vinci Coder.
Yep. So I want to ask a little bit about how your interests out of work kind of interact with your day job.
Yeah.
You work as a JavaScript developer at Salesforce right now, right?
Right.
So how much of the kind of, I guess I could call it like hardcore functional programming stuff do you use in your day-to-day job? It seems like there's this balance between familiarity of the team and like what would make the best solution in your opinion, and how do you find that trade-off?
You're totally right about that. And we actually have these debates, right? Because I want to, when I go into a code base, I want to make this just massive pile of little functions, one-off functions. And, the pile happens organically. I don't like make functions up front that I may never use. I'm just saying like every time I write a line of code, I want it to be a little reusable function. And then I take those and I combine them with, kind of different abstractions in functional programming to be able to create workflows and compositions of tiny functions. And that can be really frustrating for someone who's expecting to see just this line by line exactly what's happening in each, like they have to jump through each little function, right? to find exactly the code that's running.
Sure.
And so you have to have this kind of like leap of faith that your function is going to be as simple and small as possible, and you should just know what it does based on its type or its name, I guess, in JavaScript. But that can be frustrating. So what I do, we actually use really heavy stuff. We use like free monads for DevOps workflows which is basically your program just generates an instruction set. It's just this giant composable instruction set, and then you write a little interpreter that just hits each instruction and does actually what it's supposed to do. But it gives you the ability to say like, well, I want to go like write this to the file system, remove these files, make this HTTP call, do all this stuff. And you write your interpreter and your test code to like fake all that, and then your interpreter and your real code to like run all that, or maybe Unix versus Windows, things like that. You can have different interpreters, so it really helps. And that kind of stuff, people are like, okay, I see this is legit. Like I don't really need. But at the same time, there's some frustration between the two mentalities of indirection. Versus composable, reusable, or the giant 300-line inline functions, where some people just prefer that,
Sure. So. Hence why you write the mostly adequate guide to convince everybody.
Yeah, there you go. Like, come on,
way.
You got to do this. Well, I don't think I did a great enough job, and that was more just like, here's how you would write this stuff in other languages, and you could do it here. I can admit, we don't really use point-free Ramda or anything like that at work. We use standard ES6 dot syntax, fat arrows, some currying maybe, which is fine. It's fine by me. But the book really focused on that because it was hoping that you might go pick up a functional language right afterwards, and it'd be easy.
Sure. I guess we didn't say this either, but the book it's all written in JavaScript using JavaScript libraries. So it's kind of functional programming from maybe the perspective of other languages, but implemented in JavaScript. Is that a decent way of describing it?
Yeah. And for some, it actually turns out to be quite elegant and, particularly useful in certain situations that you might, in JavaScript, it might actually, it's arguably a better paradigm than other ones in JavaScript. However, it's not very popular. And so the goal of the book was to focus on teaching it for other languages with maybe a side like, hey, maybe you should also try this in JavaScript.
Oh, interesting. I missed that part. That's cool.
It's a big disclaimer on the front page because I just wanted to be able to sleep at night and not having people like yelling at me like, you can't do this in JavaScript, blah, blah, blah.
I missed the disclaimer then. So I want to go back to a thing you mentioned, which was you said your instinct is to start off writing this giant pile of kind of one-off functions, and then you compose them together into more useful ways. Yeah. I'm not a super experienced functional programmer, and I feel like there are tons of really clear patterns for architecture and building large applications in kind of the imperative style. But when I get into functional programming, I feel like I just have this bag of functions, and it feels hard to tell. It feels hard to compose things into abstraction layers, I guess. Is that, well, I guess the question is just how do you do that?
Well, as a matter of fact, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about at React Rally.
Perfect.
So, there's this magic abstraction that you can just put something in a box type thing, a little context. Any value goes in that box, and then you can start composing it in very interesting different ways, and you can capture concepts of like if else or try catch or async or you name it. These behavioral ideas, the behaviors, the architecture, the way you want to combine them, saying like I want to run this function, then some other function, and then this function in the middle. Like there's maybe like there's not that much. It's like maybe 5 or 6 things that you would want to do, and you would learn them once, and now you can compose all these things. And it's kind of frustrating when you do know some of these things and you see a lot of people rewriting reinventing the wheel in these giant workflows of imperative code, right? Because you're like, oh, well, you could have reused that and you could have combined it in one of these. Like, we could have learned 6 things collectively as a community and we'd be great, right? Except those 6 things have insanely scary names and are way abstract and like, are hard to learn. So that, it may be a barrier of entry. But I really think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit and a lot of amazing ideas that end up making better programs. So when you said about the architecture, all you have to do is convert your objects, just get rid of the object wrapper and just leave it in a module, right? And then import that module. So now you've got your little like pile of functions here. And oftentimes once you get rid of the objects, you end up with a different organizational scheme because your functions aren't so specific to the context they live in. So you end up with a bunch of utility libraries rather than, like instead of a user.name, you'd have maybe like a names module that does all sorts of stuff with like surname and last name. It's not really just a user thing, it's a name thing because you kind of decoupled the context those functions live in. You've uprooted them and now you're passing in the data. So they don't really necessarily need to live in all these different, very specific nouns.
Okay.
So I hope that wasn't too abstract.
No, it kind of makes sense. It's kind of like you're slicing up your program along a different axis almost then.
Yeah. And if you're passing your data in, it becomes pretty modular and your functions tend to become so much more generic that you start calling your variables X and Y. And people are like,
that's how you know
this
you've made it.
Yeah, exactly. What are you doing? But then there's, of course, your specific functions. But what I really wanted to talk about at React Rally was the idea that you could take, state and control flow are 2 of the most complex things in programming. And you could take a value and just kind of, in functional programming, it has to flow input to output of each function, right? So you can just watch your data flow. Your control flow is just kind of taken care of. If you subscribe to the idea that every function takes input to output, then every function must be composed. Otherwise, the output just gets thrown away. Like, what can a function do? What can a pure function do in functional programming other than just give its output to the next function, right? Because if you don't do that, you're not pure. You're not being functional. You're just, logging to a screen or writing a file, and the output gets lost. So you end up flowing all your data through the functions. All your side effects kind of snowball into this one big instruction set at the end that actually gets applied. And it really ends up making these really elegant control flows, similar to React.js or something like that. That uses all the same ideas, but this is a little bit more broader, more general than just that library. And then you see things like these libraries like Redux with, combined reducers, or I saw another one with a validation library that was like compose validations or combine validations. I'm like, well, these are well-known reusable abstractions that aren't particularly specific to this one thing. So if we use these, well, now I know I can combine this library with that one or my abstraction with theirs because, we're all kind of speaking the same language here and we're all talking about the same ideas. Now, those might have been conscious decisions to name those specific so they don't make people run screaming.
Sure.
But I'm just saying that if we collectively learn this and see some of these ideas, maybe we can push the community forward a little bit better to have kind of maximum composability.
Okay. That makes sense. So I think there are 2 really good clickbait blog post titles in what you said. One could be 6 weird tricks to make your code composable, and the other one is maximum composability.
That is total. Yeah, 6 weird tricks is amazing. I might rename my talk to that.
Your talk title was better. Well, that means it's wrap up time then. Well, thank you very much for your time, Brian. I'm excited to hear your talk. And where can people find out more about what you're doing if they're interested?
Well, my Twitter, I'm Dr. Boolean. I post everything there, and I'm on Medium and I'm on YouTube. But usually it all comes back to Twitter for me because it's like my go-to social network. I'm not on Facebook or anything. So
sure. And then you also mentioned JavaScript Air. So that's a great podcast that people should check out that you're a panelist on, right?
Oh, yeah, me and Matt.
Awesome.
Who shows up like once every 20 episodes.
Yeah, he's kind of a rock star.
Right.
He just comes when he wants to.
That's darn right. So, well, it was great talking to you. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it has been. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you at React Rally.
I'll see you then.